Imagine standing beside the person you love, only to feel smaller with every word they say. What would you do if the one who vowed to cherish you mocked you instead? This is my story. A corporate event, a public humiliation, and the painful reality of living with someone who calls you a cuckold to your face. Stick around to find out how it all unraveled and what I finally did to take back my life. Trust me, this isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call. Life with Amanda was never perfect, but in the beginning it felt close enough. When we first met, she was charming, radiant, and, most of all, kind. That kindness, however, had become a distant memory. Somewhere along the way, her words turned sharper, her glances colder, and her once gentle teasing became biting remarks I could never quite shake off. The morning she told me about the company corporate event was no different. "We're invited to the annual gala," she said, not looking up from her coffee. The word "we" felt like a reluctant addition, a courtesy rather than an invitation. "Sounds nice," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. "What's the theme this year?" She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes with a smirk. "Same as always. Just try not to embarrass me. Okay?" Stung, though I didn't let it show. This had become our routine. Amanda's comments were always delivered with a playful edge, but there was an undertone of cruelty that I couldn't ignore. The truth was, I had started to notice how much she enjoyed making me feel small. At first, it was subtle little jokes about my job, my habits, or the way I dressed. Over time, her words became sharper, and I began to dread moments like this, when she'd find another reason to remind me of all the ways I wasn't enough for her. Still, I told myself that this was normal. Every couple fights, right? Maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough. "Don't forget to pick up a suit," she added before leaving the table. "Something decent this time." Her words lingered as I sat alone, staring into my cold coffee. The invitation arrived a week before the event. A glossy card embossed with gold letters. Amanda had placed it on the counter with a note written in her sharp, hurried handwriting. "Don't forget to RSVP, Michael. Wouldn't want you to miss the chance to see how real men act." I stared at the note, my chest tightening. Amanda's words, once clever and flirtatious, now carried a sting that lingered long after she spoke them. Lately, every comment seemed like a reminder of my inadequacies, as if she relished pointing out how I didn't measure up. The evening of the event, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. The suit was new, dark gray with a subtle sheen. I thought it looked good, even sharp, but when Amanda walked into the room, her eyes scanned me with a clinical detachment that sent a shiver through me. "That's what you're wearing?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Is it okay?" She tilted her head, her lips curling into a smirk. "Sure, if you're aiming for middle manager at a funeral." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "I thought it looked." "Relax." She cut me off, grabbing her clutch from the dresser. "It's fine. Just stay in the background tonight, okay? No awkward jokes or trying to network. This is my night." Her words hung in the air as she breezed out of the room, leaving me standing there, staring at my reflection. I adjusted my tie one last time, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. The drive to the venue was filled with silence, broken only by Amanda's occasional sighs as she scrolled through her phone. I tried to make conversation, asking her about her colleagues, the promotion she was up for, anything to lighten the mood. "Just don't embarrass me," she said again, not even looking up. When we arrived, the venue was breathtaking. A grand ballroom filled with chandeliers and the hum of polished conversation. Amanda's demeanor shifted immediately. She smiled, laughed, and lit up the room as if a switch had been flipped. Watching her, I felt both proud and invisible. "Michael," she said, taking my arm briefly. For a moment, I thought she was going to introduce me to someone, but instead, she leaned in close, her voice low and firm. "Do me a favor and grab us drinks. Something strong. I'll be over there." Before I could respond, she had already walked away, weaving through the crowd with ease, leaving me to navigate the sea of strangers alone. As I stood in line at the bar, I could see her across the room, surrounded by her colleagues. She was laughing, leaning in close to one of the men, a tall, confident guy in a tailored suit. He said something, and she threw her head back, touching his arm as if he were the most fascinating person in the world. For the first time that night, the knot in my stomach turned into something heavier, something colder. I returned with the drinks, carefully navigating through the crowd. Amanda was exactly where I'd left her, now in the center of a small group. Her laughter echoed above the gentle hum of conversation, drawing the attention of everyone around her. "Here you go," I said, handing her the glass. She barely acknowledged me, taking the drink without breaking her gaze from the tall man beside her. "Thanks, Michael," she said dismissively, as if I were a waiter instead of her husband. I stood there awkwardly, unsure whether to stay or leave. Amanda didn't make it any easier. She didn't introduce me, didn't even glance my way. I was invisible. "Is this your husband?" the tall man asked, finally noticing me. His smile was polite, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of amusement, as if he'd already decided I wasn't worth his attention. Amanda's smile faltered for a split second before she responded. "Oh, yes," she said, her tone overly sweet, almost mocking. "Michael. He's—" She paused, looking me up and down as if searching for the right words. "He's dependable." The group chuckled, and my stomach dropped. "Well, dependable is important," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Isn't it?" Amanda replied, taking a sip of her drink. She turned back to the group, effectively dismissing me once again. I wanted to speak up, to say something clever or assertive, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood there, rooted in place, feeling the weight of their judgment. As the night wore on, Amanda's behavior only got worse. She floated from group to group, her laughter and charm captivating everyone she spoke to. With each passing moment, her flirtation with the tall man grew more blatant. She leaned closer, touched his arm, and even whispered something in his ear that made him laugh. At one point, she turned to me, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Michael, don't just stand there like a statue. Go mingle or something." The group laughed again, and I felt the heat rise in my face. I wanted to vanish, to escape the humiliation that was quickly becoming unbearable. But the breaking point came later in the evening. Amanda and the tall man were standing by the bar, their conversation growing increasingly intimate. I approached, trying to mask my unease with a weak smile. "Amanda," I said softly, placing a hand on her arm. "Can we talk for a moment?" She turned to me, her expression a mix of irritation and amusement. "What is it, Michael?" I hesitated, the words faltering under the weight of her gaze. Before I could finish, she smirked and looked back at the man. "You'll have to excuse him," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Michael gets a little insecure around real men." The man laughed, and my heart sank. "Amanda," I said again, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, relax. You're acting like a cuckold." The word hit me like a slap. My breath caught, and for a moment, the world seemed to blur around me. I turned and walked away, my chest tight and my vision swimming. I found an empty corner of the room, gripping the edge of a table to steady myself. Her words replayed in my mind, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. For the rest of the night, I stayed on the outskirts, watching as Amanda continued to shine, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the devastation she had left in her wake. The car ride home was suffocating. Amanda, still slightly tipsy from the night's cocktails, scrolled through her phone, her laughter echoing faintly as she read messages or relived moments from the gala. I kept my eyes on the road, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. "You were so quiet tonight," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. I didn't respond immediately. What could I say? "Honestly, Michael," she continued, her tone sharper now, "you could have at least tried to have fun. Everyone noticed how stiff you were. Everyone noticed a lot of things." I muttered under my breath, gripping the wheel tighter. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with irritation. I hesitated, knowing that whatever I said next could ignite the firestorm I'd been avoiding all night. but the words were already bubbling to the surface, too heavy to swallow down again. "Calling me a cuckold in front of your colleagues?" I said, my voice shaking. "That was humiliating, Amanda." She laughed. A short, sharp sound that felt like a slap. "Oh, come on, Michael. Don't be so sensitive. It was a joke. Everyone knew that." "It didn't feel like a joke," I said quietly, my eyes fixed on the road. "Well, maybe that's the problem," she snapped. "You're always so serious, so insecure. Do you know how exhausting that is? Maybe if you acted like you had a spine, people wouldn't think it was true." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I bit my tongue, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. Crying now would only confirm everything she believed about me. We pulled into the driveway, and Amanda stepped out of the car without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I stayed in the car for a few moments, staring blankly at the dashboard, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. Inside the house, Amanda had already kicked off her shoes and settled onto the couch, her phone in hand. I stood in the doorway, feeling the weight of the evening press down on me. "Are you just going to stand there all night?" she asked, not even looking up. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked upstairs to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the muffled sounds of Amanda's laughter drifting up from the living room. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had the woman I once loved, the woman who once made me feel invincible, become the person who tore me down at every opportunity? For the first time, I let the tears come. They flowed silently, hot and bitter, as I stared at the floor. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Amanda eventually came upstairs and slipped into bed beside me. She didn't say a word, didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the storm she had created. Her indifference was louder than any argument we could have had. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed the events of the night over and over again, each memory sharper than the last. Her words, her laughter, the looks from her colleagues. They all formed a chorus that wouldn't let me rest. Somewhere in the darkness, a thought began to take shape. A question I couldn't ignore. How much more of this can I take? The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Amanda was already gone, leaving behind a faint trace of her perfume and a half-empty coffee cup on the counter. It was a scene I'd grown accustomed to. Her absence was often more present than her company. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched breakfast I'd made for myself. My thoughts drifted back to the gala, replaying her words, her laughter, and the way she looked at me as if I were something less. This wasn't the first time Amanda had made me feel this way. The humiliation at the gala was just a more public version of what had been happening behind closed doors for years. The memories began to surface, unbidden and relentless. There was the time we had dinner with her friends, and she casually mentioned how Michael isn't exactly a go-getter, but he's steady, like a safe bet. Her friends had laughed politely, and I'd sat there, swallowing my pride along with my wine. Or the countless times she'd compared me to other men. "Why don't you hit the gym like Chris?" she'd say, her tone dripping with mock concern. "You'd look so much better with some muscle." And then there were the smaller, everyday jabs. The way she'd roll her eyes when I talked about my day at work. The way she'd sigh heavily whenever I asked her opinion on something, as if even answering me was a chore. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a slow, steady erosion of my confidence, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. I'd always told myself it wasn't that bad. She was just stressed, or joking, or that I was overreacting. But sitting there in the quiet kitchen, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Amanda didn't respect me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, pausing on a name I hadn't called in months. Jake. Jake was an old friend, someone I used to confide in before Amanda started pulling me away from everyone who made me feel grounded. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. Amanda had made it clear she didn't like Jake. "He's a bad influence," she'd said, "always filling your head with ideas that don't make sense." But as I sat there, I realized I couldn't keep doing this alone. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't dismiss my feelings or make me feel like I was overreacting. I hit the call button. "Mike?" Hey man, it's been a while. Jake's voice was warm, familiar. Yeah, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. It has. Everything okay? He asked, his tone shifting. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How do you even begin to explain years of feeling small, of being told you're not enough? Not really, I finally said. Can we meet up? Of course, Jake said without hesitation. Name the time and place. As I hung up, a flicker of something unfamiliar sparked inside me. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. Jake and I met at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. It was one of those cozy places with mismatched furniture and the smell of fresh pastries hanging in the air. I hadn't been there in years. Amanda preferred more upscale spots, where everything felt curated and expensive. Jake was already there when I arrived, leaning back in his chair with a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, the same easy grin I remembered from college. Mike, he said, standing to give me a quick hug. Man, it's good to see you. You've been off the grid. Yeah, I said, sitting down across from him. It's been a lot. He tilted his head, studying me with a seriousness I wasn't used to. You look tired, man. What's going on? I hesitated, my fingers tracing the edge of my coffee cup. The words felt heavy, stuck in my throat. Admitting the truth out loud made it feel too real, but I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. It's Amanda, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Things have been bad. Jake didn't interrupt or press me. He just nodded, his eyes encouraging me to continue. I told him everything. The insults, the comparisons, the way she'd humiliated me at the gala. The way her words cut deeper than I ever let on. And last night, I said, my voice breaking slightly, she called me a cuckold. In front of everyone. Jake's expression darkened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Mike, that's not okay. None of this is okay. I know, I said, my hands trembling slightly. But what do? I can't just leave. We've been together for so long. And what if she's right? What if I'm the problem? Stop, Jake said firmly, his voice cutting through my spiral of self-doubt. You're not the problem. Listen to yourself. She's tearing you down, man. That's not love. That's control. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Deep down, I knew he was right, but admitting it felt like betraying everything I'd built with Amanda. People have rough patches, I said weakly, clinging to the excuses I'd been telling myself for years. Rough patches don't involve humiliation, Mike, Jake said. They don't involve making you feel like you're less than. You deserve better than this. I looked down at my coffee, the steam curling up in delicate wisps. I don't even know who I am without her anymore. Then maybe it's time to find out, Jake said gently. Look, I'm not telling you to make any decisions right now, but you can't keep living like this. Talk to someone, therapy, a support group, whatever it takes. Just don't keep this to yourself anymore. His words lingered as we finished our coffee and parted ways. For the first time in years, I felt like I had permission to feel what I was feeling, to acknowledge that something was deeply wrong. Driving home, I realized that the weight in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt just a little lighter. That night, I sat in the quiet of the bedroom, staring at the blank page of a notebook I'd pulled from the back of the closet. I started writing. Everything I couldn't say to Amanda, everything I couldn't admit to myself until now. As the pen moved across the paper, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't a solution or a plan, but it was a start. For the first time, I wondered what my life could look like if I stopped trying to shrink myself to fit into hers. The notebook became my sanctuary. Each night, after Amanda had gone to bed or disappeared into her world of phone screens and muted laughter, I would sit at the edge of the bed and pour my thoughts onto the pages. At first, the words came hesitantly, jagged and awkward. I wrote about the way she looked through me at the gala, the way her laughter rang in my ears like a taunt. I wrote about the years of small cuts, each one leaving a scar I tried to ignore. But as the days passed, my writing shifted. I began to write about the person I used to be before Amanda, before I started bending myself to fit into her world. I wrote about my dreams, my friends, and the small joys I'd abandoned to keep the peace. It was like meeting a stranger and realizing, with a jolt, that the stranger was me. Amanda, of course, noticed nothing. She was too absorbed in her own life, her job, her endless stream of social engagements. Her indifference was both a blessing and a curse. It gave me the space to think, but it also served as a reminder of how far apart we'd grown. One evening, a week after my conversation with Jake, I decided to take a small step. Amanda was out at a networking dinner, and I had the house to myself. I opened my laptop and began researching therapists in the area. The idea of therapy felt both intimidating and liberating. Amanda had always scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as something for people who can't handle their own problems. But I was done listening to her voice in my head. I found a local clinic with good reviews and sent an email requesting an appointment. As I hit send, a strange mix of fear and relief washed over me. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. The first session was scheduled for the following week. I didn't tell Amanda. I didn't see the point. She'd only mock me, twist it into another piece of evidence for her running narrative of my inadequacy. The day of the appointment, I left work early, my heart pounding as I drove to the clinic. The therapist, Dr. Lewis, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calming presence. "So, Michael," she said after the introductions, "what brings you here today?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibilities. For a moment, I didn't know where to begin. But then I thought of Amanda's words at the gala, the way she'd looked at me, and the years of feeling like I was fading away. "I'm not sure who I am anymore," I said finally, my voice cracking, "and I don't know how to fix it." Dr. Lewis nodded, her expression empathetic but steady. "That's a brave place to start," she said. Over the next hour, I spoke about things I'd never said aloud before. The isolation, the constant put-downs, the way Amanda seemed to thrive on making me feel small. "Michael," Dr. Lewis said gently as the session neared its end, "what you're describing sounds like emotional abuse." The word hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. Abuse. I'd never thought of it that way. I'd always told myself that Amanda was just blunt, or stressed, or that I was overreacting. But hearing someone else say it with such clarity made it impossible to deny. As I left the clinic, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, but also a small, flickering sense of hope. Naming the problem didn't solve it, but it gave me a starting point. That night, as I sat in bed with my notebook, I wrote one simple sentence: "I deserve better." The morning after my therapy session, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't overwhelming or triumphant. It was fragile, like the first light of dawn creeping through heavy clouds. But it was there. Amanda was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, scrolling through her phone with a cup of coffee in hand. She glanced up briefly when I entered but didn't say anything. "Morning," I said, my voice even. She replied, not looking up. For years, I might have let the silence stretch, unsure of how to navigate her indifference. But today was different. I didn't want to tiptoe around her anymore. "I'd like to talk about something," I said, sitting down across from her. Amanda raised an eyebrow, finally setting her phone down. "Oh? What now?" Her tone was already dismissive, but I forced myself to push through the discomfort. "The way you spoke to me at the gala, it wasn't okay." She blinked, clearly taken aback. "Are we seriously still on this?" "Michael, it was a joke. You're being dramatic." "It wasn't a joke to me," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It hurt, and it's not just about the gala. This has been happening for a long time. The comparisons, the put-downs, the way you treat me like I'm less than." Amanda laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? Give me a break, Michael. You're too sensitive. Maybe if you toughened up a bit, you wouldn't feel so attacked all the time." Her words stung, but I was prepared for them. Dr. Lewis had warned me that confronting Amanda might not go smoothly, especially if she was used to deflecting blame. "This isn't about me being sensitive," I said. "It's about respect. And I'm not going to let you talk to me like that anymore." Amanda stared at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and annoyance. Wow, did Jake put you up to this? Or was it one of those self-help podcasts you've been secretly listening to? No one put me up to anything, I replied. This is me, telling you how I feel, and I'm asking you to stop belittling me. For a moment, Amanda didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she stood up, grabbing her coffee and phone. You know what, Michael? She said, her voice icy. I don't have time for this. She walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone at the table. The silence she left behind was deafening, but for the first time, it didn't feel like defeat. I said what I needed to say, and even if Amanda wasn't ready to hear it, I felt a small flicker of pride for standing my ground. That evening, Amanda was distant. She barely spoke to me, retreating to her own world of texts and social media. Part of me wanted to reach out, to smooth things over like I always did. But I knew that would only reinforce the cycle. Instead, I went for a walk. The cool evening air was refreshing, and with each step, I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly. When I returned home, Amanda was already in bed, her back turned to me. I didn't try to engage her. Instead, I pulled out my notebook and wrote a single sentence. Standing up for myself doesn't mean I'm wrong. It means I'm trying to heal. As I closed the notebook and turned off the light, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Amanda's reaction had only reinforced how deeply ingrained the dynamics of our relationship were. But I also knew that this was the first step towards something better, whether it was with her or without her. The next few days were a strange kind of limbo. Amanda kept her distance, retreating into her usual distractions. She didn't bring up the conversation we'd had in the kitchen, and I didn't push her to. I couldn't help but wonder if she was waiting for me to cave, to apologize for upsetting the delicate balance we'd established over the years. But I wasn't going to apologize. I couldn't keep doing that, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I had drawn my line, and I wasn't about to let her cross it again. On Thursday evening, Amanda announced that she was going out with some colleagues for drinks. I'll be back late, she said, her tone casual, as though I should simply accept it. Okay, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Have fun. She gave me a quick glance, almost too quick to read, before turning away. I don't need your permission, Michael. I let the remark slide off me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the familiar urge to explain myself or apologize. That night, after Amanda left, I stayed home. It had become a habit of mine to retreat into myself when she was gone, to try to regain a sense of peace I didn't always find when she was around. But tonight felt different. I didn't feel empty. There was no hollow ache in my chest. I took a deep breath and went to the living room, sitting down with my notebook. Writing had become my lifeline, my way of grounding myself in the chaos of my thoughts. It was then that I received a text from Amanda. Just so you know, some guy from the office asked me out tonight. Not my type, but just thought you'd like to know. I stared at the message, the knot in my stomach tightening. The passive-aggressive nature of it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't about the guy, it was about control, about making sure I was always aware that I was never enough. I took a deep breath and set my phone down. I had learned enough in therapy to know that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was Amanda's way of reminding me of my place, of reminding me that she held the power in this relationship. But I was done playing along. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, she doesn't get to have that power anymore. I'm not here to be her emotional punching bag. When Amanda returned home hours later, she was drunk. Her voice was louder than usual, and there was a slur to her words. She walked into the house, kicking off her heels and swaying slightly. I stayed in the living room, my eyes focused on the pages of my notebook. You know, Michael, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. I don't get you. Why are you so quiet all the time? I was out having fun, and you're just sitting here, sulking. I didn't respond. Are you really this boring? This pathetic? She continued, her words laced with bitterness. No wonder I have to look for excitement elsewhere. Her words felt like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let them break me. The old me would have apologized, tried to smooth over the tension. But I didn't. I stayed silent, and the silence stretched between us. Amanda stopped pacing and turned to look at me. For a moment, there was something almost vulnerable in her expression. A crack in the carefully constructed facade she wore. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by contempt. "I don't know why I even bother with you," she spat, her voice cold. "You're nothing but a doormat. A coward." The words stung, but I wasn't going to flinch. I wasn't going to beg for her approval anymore. "You've made that pretty clear," I said quietly, my voice steady. "But I'm not going to be your punching bag anymore." Amanda stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Then she turned away, storming off to the bedroom without another word. For the rest of the night, I stayed in the living room. I didn't chase her. I didn't apologize. I just sat there, feeling a strange sense of peace in the quiet. The next morning, Amanda didn't speak to me. She didn't even look at me as she left for work. And for the first time in years, I felt a small flicker of hope. I wasn't trapped anymore. Amanda's coldness continued for days. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were clipped, dismissive. It was clear she didn't know how to handle my sudden change. I had finally drawn a line, and now I was facing the consequences. Every night, she came home late, avoiding me like I was invisible. And when she did speak, it was always sharp and mocking. One evening, after she'd returned from another night out, I tried to talk again. "Amanda, we need to talk about where we're headed." She looked at me, annoyance flashing in her eyes. "You've already said your piece. I don't need to hear it again." "Then why are we still living like this?" I asked. "Why are you treating me like I don't matter?" Her expression hardened, and she laughed bitterly. "Because you don't. Not anymore." The words hit harder than any argument or insult. I could feel my resolve beginning to crack, but I couldn't back down now. "I'm not going to be your doormat anymore, Amanda," I said, my voice low. She smirked. "Good luck with that. You're nothing without me." That night, she packed a bag and left without a word. The silence that followed felt suffocating, but I knew I couldn't let it break me. The days after Amanda left were a strange mix of silence and tension. I spent most of my time at home, reflecting on everything that had led to this point. The house felt too big without her in it, yet I couldn't bring myself to miss her in the way I thought I would. I knew I had to prepare myself for the reality that things might end for good. It was hard to imagine life without her, even though I had spent so many years questioning whether she was ever really present in my life. One evening, I found myself packing a bag for a short trip. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I needed a break from the house, from everything that had been weighing on me. As I zipped up the bag, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Amanda. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a moment, heart pounding. What did she want now? I knew she wasn't coming back with open arms. She never did anything without conditions. But something in me felt the need to respond. I couldn't let her dictate the terms of this anymore. "I'm listening." I waited, staring at the screen, but no reply came. The silence between us felt more powerful than any conversation we could have had. It was a few days before Amanda came back, and when she did, it was in the dead of night just like before. She walked in, her face unreadable, her posture rigid. The moment she stepped inside, the air between us thickened. I was sitting in the living room, the same spot where I had spent countless nights waiting for her, wondering when she'd acknowledge me. Now I was no longer waiting. Amanda stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. "I'm here. Can we talk now?" I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to retreat, to go back to my safe place of silence. But I had come too far to back down now. "You said you wanted to talk," I said quietly. "So talk." She scoffed. "You really think you've got it all figured out now, don't you? Like you're some kind of victim." "I'm not playing that game anymore," I replied. "I'm done with the insults, the manipulation. I'm done pretending it's okay." Amanda's face twisted in frustration. "You think you've suffered? You think you've had it rough?" Her voice raised, and I could hear the venom in every word. "You've been nothing but a doormat for me. You let me walk all over you, and now you want to act like you're the one who's been hurt." I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. "I've let you treat me like shit for too long, Amanda. But I'm not doing it anymore. You don't get to control me. You don't get to tell me who I am or what I'm worth. Her expression faltered for a moment, as though she wasn't sure how to respond to that. But then she sneered. You really think you can just walk away from me? You think anyone else is going to put up with you? You're nothing without me, Michael. The words stung, but I felt a spark of something else. A quiet, growing strength. I might be nothing to you, but I'm more than enough for myself. For a long moment we stood there, the silence thick between us. Amanda's anger was palpable, but it felt hollow now. I was no longer afraid of her cruelty. Finally, she turned, heading toward the door without a word. I'm done with this, she said, her voice tight. You can live your pathetic little life without me. And with that, she was gone. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel a deep, aching loss. I felt relief. It wasn't the end I had envisioned for us, but it was the one I needed. The days following Amanda's departure were strangely quiet. The house, once filled with tension, now seemed empty in a way that was both unsettling and freeing. I didn't know what to do with the space she had left behind. It wasn't just the physical space. It was the emotional void I had been too afraid to acknowledge until now. I spent the first few days in a fog. I went through the motions, work, meals, walks, but it all felt like a blur. There were moments when I wanted to reach out, to beg Amanda to come back, to fix what we had. But those thoughts were fleeting. I had made my choice. Slowly, I began to focus on myself in ways I hadn't in years. I returned to therapy, and with each session, I peeled away layers of guilt, shame, and fear. I realized that all these years, I had been holding on to someone who wasn't holding on to me. And in doing so, I had lost sight of who I really was. I started taking care of myself, physically and mentally. I went to the gym, something I hadn't done in forever. The initial soreness was a reminder of how much I had neglected my own body, but with every workout, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. I also reconnected with old friends. Friends I hadn't seen in years because Amanda had always been the center of my world. It felt good to laugh with people who knew me before I became her husband. One evening, after work, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't have any grand plans, but I knew it was time to do something for myself, something I'd put off for far too long. I started writing again, not just in my notebook but in a blog. I didn't know where it would lead, but it felt right. Writing gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't had in years. As I typed the first few words, I realized something. I was finally free. The months after Amanda left were filled with small victories. I found new routines, new ways of living that didn't revolve around her needs and whims. My days were quieter, but there was a certain peace in that silence. I was learning how to exist without constantly worrying about someone else's judgment or approval. But even with the progress, moving on wasn't easy. There were moments when I missed the comfort of the familiar. I missed having someone there, even if that someone had been the source of my pain. It was during one of these quiet nights that I ran into Sophie. She was an old friend from my college years, someone I hadn't seen in a long time. We bumped into each other at a cafe, and our conversation flowed easily, like no time had passed. She was kind, smart, and, most importantly, she didn't expect anything from me. We began meeting more often, talking about everything from the trivial to the profound. Sophie had a way of making me feel seen, not for what Amanda had made me, but for who I truly was. I found myself laughing again, really laughing, in a way I hadn't in years. As the weeks went by, I realized that I was starting to feel something more for her. It was a terrifying thought. Letting someone in again, trusting someone after what I'd been through. But it also felt like something I couldn't ignore. One evening, after dinner at a quiet restaurant, Sophie reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "Michael," she said softly, "I know this might be too soon, but I see how much you've changed, how much you've grown." I looked at her, the weight of her words settling in. She was right. I had changed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to something that wasn't good for me. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything serious," I said, my voice quiet. "But I want to try. I want to see where this goes." Sophie smiled, a warm, understanding smile. "I'm in no rush, Michael. We can take it slow. We have time. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. It had been nearly a year since Amanda left, and the person I was now felt like someone new. Someone stronger, freer, more alive. The weight that had once held me down seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a quiet sense of self-worth I hadn't known I could feel. Sophie and I had taken things slow, letting our friendship evolve into something deeper, but always with an understanding that we were both carrying our own histories. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, and that was enough for me. One evening, as we sat in the park, watching the sunset, I turned to Sophie. She was reading something on her phone, but I could see the warmth in her smile, the comfort in her presence. "Sophie," I said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about where I've been, about how far I've come." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a calm understanding. "You've come a long way, Michael. I can see it." I nodded, my thoughts turning to the past, to Amanda, to everything I had endured. "I think I'm finally ready to let go of the past, to stop carrying that weight around." Sophie reached out, gently placing her hand over mine. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting, Michael. It means accepting that what happened doesn't define you. You're not the man you were back then. You're something new." Her words struck deep, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. As we walked back to my apartment, I knew that my journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, new hurdles to face. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. I was finally learning how to live for myself. The past year had been full of pain, growth, and change, but it had also been a journey of rediscovery. I had learned that I was worthy of respect, love, and kindness, not because of what anyone else thought, but because I had started to see it in myself. If you're reading this, I want you to know something. You're not trapped in a cycle of pain. You don't have to stay in a relationship that makes you feel small or insignificant. You are worthy of so much more. Take the time to heal. Take the time to rediscover who you are outside of anyone else's expectations. The road won't be easy, but it will be worth it. If you've experienced something similar, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's support each other on this journey. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Your story matters and your healing is possible.